Blog Talk Radio.
Namaste, everyone. This is Nature of Reality Radio on April 8, 2015. This is your host, Andrew Fisher, broadcasting every Wednesday from the suburbs of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to expose the true and false nature of reality for what it is and what it isn't. Today on the show, return guest of sorts, Tom Clearwater. I had him on that roundtable discussion, which I was the second-rate host. I would like to say Elizabeth Diamond. She was the one who came up with the idea of that roundtable discussion, and so I guess that makes me a second-rate host for that show. And Tom Clearwater was on that panel. We talked about ET disclosure. I guess we'll talk about some of that same stuff again, but elaborate on it in this interview. Got to get a full 2 hours in. I do see someone in the queue here, area code 661, and I did accept Tom Clearwater's Skype request about 10 minutes ago. So, Tom, if that is you in the queue, I did accept your request. If that is you, I'll let you on it no later than 10 minutes after the hour. But first of all, just one more thing about Tom Clearwater. He's best known probably for that interview he did with Alfred Weber in the not-too-distant past to talk about how humans are Tesla coils of sorts. And I believe he calls it scalar humanity, about how this potential can be activated and how our humanity can be viewed through this lens. He's also done a lot of funding, like I said, pertaining to ET disclosure. So I will get Tom on no later than 10 after the hour, but first we will do the news courtesy of Alex Jones and Company at InfoWars. First article, shock study. Cops 25 times less likely to shoot unarmed blacks than whites. Officers typically hesitate when shooting black suspects, according to researchers. Why does race have to make a difference in like this? Need I say more? All right, next article. Nephew of JFK. Vaccines are a, quote, holocaust, unquote. Bill to make shots mandatory in California gets first hearing. Okay, if this bill passes, we know that there absolutely has got to be flaws and rigging in the system. There's actually a petition, I don't know if the time period has ended, about vaccines. The government has to acknowledge something about vaccines being bad, and enough people have definitely signed the petition for a White House response, and that's on whitehouse.gov. So I guess check that out. I don't remember exactly what the title of that is, but if anyone wants to look at that, by all means. And this bill in California, it better get shut down so shots don't become mandatory, no pun intended. Our next article, retro history lesson with Andy Griffith. The answer in 1984 is 1776. All right, I don't have time to get into that. You guys have to check that out on your own. Next article, guilty. Boston bombing attorneys convict their own client. Questions remain as convicted bomber heads toward possible death penalty. So how did he get convicted when it is so obvious that the Boston bombing was a false flag? Anybody want proof of that? Check out my interview with InfoWars reporter Dan Badandi. The first thing I do is give him the opportunity to expose how the Boston bombing was so obviously a government-staged false flag, and how he totally blew up the news conferences. He canceled 3 news conferences because he dared to ask hard questions like, is this Boston bombing a government-staged false flag that's going to be used to justify putting the TSA and the military out on the streets of America to stick their hands down our pants and violate civil liberties? And the governor of Massachusetts was like, no, next question. And then the next thing you knew, the press conference was shut down, and a couple more were shut down. And Dan Badai was like, we have pictures of InfoWars showing the bombers caught on video, and false flag, it's going to be used to take civil liberties. Dan the Kraken Badandi, you are the man. All right, next article. Iran sends warships to Yemen as Arab coalition considers ground troops. Tensions increase near Bab al-Mandab Strait, a choke point for much of the world's oil. Well, that's probably why the tensions are increasing there. So Iran is one sending the warships to Yemen, and the Arab coalition considering getting ground troops. I'd love to have time to look into this article to get more details on this, but I don't have time for that. And, oil, it's a shame. Nikola Tesla, I'm sure some of his technology could have made oil obsolete, but the powers that be would not allow it, so he couldn't get it out to humanity like he wanted to. And now I'm talking about oil here being at a choke point for a strait where tensions are rising, so it's probably the oil, even though it doesn't have to be the oil because we have the technology to make oil obsolete. What a shame. But anyway, next article, Walter Scott shooting, what they're not telling you. the real narrative the media hides. Okay, I don't have time to get into what this is about, but the mainstream media will hide things, and let me make it very clear, many of the reporters and journalists, they don't really mean any bad. They think they're doing well for everybody. They just follow a policy of you write what you're told, and they have no idea that the people that are telling them what to write do not have good intentions. So that's the way it goes in this matrix. But let me make it very clear: you got to expose not the government to tell the truth. You got not force the government to tell the truth. Well, you should, but the mainstream media. It's the mainstream media you got to harass and hassle more than the government in order to make them expose the truth. Because the media, they are the arch that holds it together. If the government can use the media to get the lies out, or should I say now, if they can't use the media to get the lies out because we force the media to tell the truth, then it's over for the government. So I think we should all make it easy for ourselves. I mean, go for the government too, but try to attack the mainstream media, force them to tell the truth, bombard them with, we know you're lying, we know you're writing what you're told, and if you don't write what you're told, you lose your job, well, you might as well quit your job and find another job or whatever. Just don't work for the mainstream media anymore, because they lie, or if they're not lying, they don't tell the whole truth. Our next article, video, cop shoots fleeing man 8 times, claims his life was endangered. Footage exposes lies, evidence planting leads to murder charge. You shoot a fleeing man. Okay, didn't I say something earlier about how cops are 25 times less likely to shoot unarmed blacks and whites? Okay, so if the guy was a black, he wouldn't be as likely to have been shot 8 times, or maybe he would have been shot 4 times instead of 8 times than if he was white. Well, some cops are nuts. You know, a lot of the stuff the cops wear, the badges and the hats and such. Check out Mark Passio's by the way, the Free Your Mind conference. I got all the speakers on virtual speakers from the 2011 and 2013 Free Your Mind conferences in Philadelphia. On my past shows, that conference is going on again this weekend. It's not in Philadelphia; it's in Bucks County, I think, in Levittown. I'll be going to that, and definitely gonna ask some of the people at that show at that conference if they want to come on my show, but. Oh man, I lost my train of thought. I forgot the reason I was going to mention the conference, but I seem to have lost my train of thought as to why I was referencing that. It has something to do with this. But Mark Passio, Mark Passio, he did a presentation at the 2011 conference. That's right, talking about how the badges and that the hats and everything that the police wear, it has symbols that affect them at a subconscious level, which causes them to act like assholes. And if they weren't wearing those badges, and also the colors too, the red and blue lights on the cop car, that's an imbalance between energies, which causes them to act in an imbalanced way. Green, if their lights are green, or if their uniforms are green and not blue, they'd act better because green is a color of balance. But if that can be used in bad ways, like our money, that's colored green to make balance in something that's anything but balanced, because it's fractional reserve banking. Nothing balanced about that. And it's the powers that be for you, using balanced colors to unbalance our reality and make things all screwed up. But Mark Passio does a great job exposing how cops and military personnel act like jerks because they're affected subconsciously. So that's one way to make cops act better. And also judges too, the robe that judges wear, that's the cloak of Saturn. Saturn is a satanic motif, and that causes judges to act like assholes too, simply because their cloak symbolizes a satanic motif. All right, one last article here before I get Tom on. DAA officials say agency's mass surveillance program before 9/11 served as blueprint for NSA. Mass surveillance began with the establishment of national security state in 1947 when the National Security Act was signed, which in effect made the president a dictatorship. Yeah, that was Truman who signed that, because the president, the vice president, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of Defense could declare national emergency and under the guise of national security and control everything martial law-like. And since the vice president, the Secretary of State, and Secretary of Defense are chosen by the president, that basically turned the president into a dictatorship. Jim Mars is one truther who says that was one of the biggest turning points in our American history, the 1947 signing of the National Security Act. So there was a lot of mass surveillance then, but nowhere near as complex as it is now. But that's enough of that. Without further ado, I will get Tom Clearwater on the air. Tom Clearwater, is this you, area code 661?
It is me, Andrew. Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's glad to have you back. That roundtable discussion was a blast, although I hate to say, because Elizabeth Diamond played some sort of song at the end, there's a notice on my YouTube video saying this video has been banned in some countries, and it had to do with that song she put at the end, but whatever, she didn't seem to have that problem. But other than that, it seemed to get positive reviews, although the sound on Steve Bassett's microphone did cause some people to get a little pissed off, and voted a thumbs down for that video because the sound on his end was bad. But what the hell? I think the information we got out in there was great, and we did touch on some of the things you talked about with the Tesla coils, and I'd like to get into that in much more detail. So the whole thing about science of scalar humanity, about humans are Tesla coils. I know you did talk about this on Alfred Weber's interview, so this information's already out there. But hey, I got to get a 2-hour radio show in so you can preach to the choir to all your listeners, and you can enlighten the people that have never heard of you. So tell us all about scalar humanity, humans as Tesla coils. You've got the floor.
Sure. Let's. Why don't we?
Oh.
Hi.
Can you back up? I accidentally put your microphone on mute. I was trying to put mine on mute. So what did you say? Anything important? Sorry about that.
No, I was just.
All right, just start again.
There.
Sorry about
fine.
that. Go ahead.
Good, Andrew. So when you're talking something called scalar science, basically, and I'll give you my understanding, and I've gone into this quite in depth, though I don't proclaim to be any sort of kind of like super practiced expert in terms of scalar science. Essentially what you're talking is a practical use of polarity or opposition. So if you look, for instance, at let's say a Tesla coil, what you have in a Tesla coil is you have parts of a very simple electronics circuit. One part is, you could call it the closed circuit element of the circuit, which involves basically an input power supply that is modulated in such a way that it creates a signal. And that part of the supply operates in a kind of a typical electronics fashion. On the other side of the Tesla coil, and this completes the circuit actually, is an open circuit element of the circuit. And this part of the circuit is basically, like the term open suggests, open in that it does not have a completing circularity to it. So in a typical electronics circuit, as the word circuit suggests, the circuit operates in circular fashion where it has a starting point. You can, for instance, trace where, let's say, the supposed electrons go through the circuit around and over here and around there, and they will end up at the place from which you started, forming a circle, essentially. In an open circuit configuration, you have no circle, and so that part of the circuit is left in what might be called a linear kind of configuration. So these two elements of a Tesla coil are basically opposite to each other, and so they create what is can be considered, let's say, a fundamental polarity. So you have the closed circuit operating, which operates in its own realm, essentially, and in a very different way than the open circuit operating, which operates in its own realm in a very different way. But the two are essentially acting in harmony together, and that is the key to, let's say, a Tesla coil, which is to have all circuit elements operating fundamentally in resonant harmony with all other circuit elements, forming an overall harmonic structure using this principle of polarity. So that's kind of like broad brush, a little bit kind of about how a Tesla coil is structured. In the most general terms, in that sense, like I said, you have the open circuit and the closed circuit elements. Now, if you look at each of these elements, the closed and the open circuit elements, what you will see is that each has essentially what might be considered oppositional circuit elements in it. So, for instance, if you and I wish I had a diagram I could point to here, but if you take the open circuit secondary side of the Tesla coil, it is essentially just a capacitor and an inductor in series or in series parallel, depending on your view of how the circuit operates. But you basically have a capacitor and an inductor. Now, an inductor traffics in magnetic energies. A capacitor, on the other hand, operates using electrical energies. And we know from, the early work of, let's say, Faraday and Maxwell, that electricity and magnetism are essentially just two aspects of one fundamental thing. Now, they called it an electromagnetic field, which, fair enough, is I suppose, an acceptable description, or acceptable to me to some degree. For my part, a more accurate description of electric and magnetic in their relation to each other is that they are polar opposites to each other. As polar opposites, and affirming the Faraday-Maxwell position on electromagnetism, they will always be found together, and they will never be found singly or apart. So where you find electricity, you will always find magnetism. And where you find magnetism, you will always find electricity. The two are in some fundamental relation in their opposition as being essentially two sides of one coin. And as two sides of one coin, of course, there is only one coin. But the coin is not described as either side. It is both sides. But the sides of the coin do not necessarily comprise the entirety of the coin. The coin has its own existence. So for any polar opposite reality, the two sides, like yin and yang, which is a perfect symbol for polar opposition, the two sides operate in fundamental harmony together, in the very sense that their existence is kind of like, how to put it, one is like the inside-out version of the other. So if you were to take, let's say, electricity and pop it inside out, whatever that would mean, my sense is that would mean that you would be creating what is called magnetism. And if you take, let's say, magnetism and pop it inside out, you would have electricity. So in a Tesla coil, what you have this kind of like global polarity involving open and closed circuit configuration. And each of these elements of the circuit operate using electric and magnetic components that are tuned to each other. And in that opposition, they are fundamentally, it's a dual opposition. If you think about it, you have the overall opposition of the open-closed element, and you have the opposition of the circuit elements appearing in and as those open and closed elements. So basically, what you have in a Tesla coil is a very simple device that uses fundamental polarity. And that is, in my view, the actual secret of what Tesla coils, and we could call it Tesla science, is practically all about. Now, how can we relate, let's say, a description like that to human affairs, or let's say to the human body, the human architecture? Well, it seems to me that that in this reality that we exist in here, that we are in what can be called a dualistic reality. That is, wherever we look, whatever we see, there is opposition. There is polarity. We have heavy and light. We have light and dark. We have hot and cold. We have north and south, east and west. All of these oppositional elements essentially define our reality here on this planet. And so a Tesla coil is essentially tapping into the most fundamental layer of what this reality is about, because a Tesla coil is basically a device that utilizes opposition or polarity. It is tapping into the deepest layer, essentially, of what our reality is here. So, am I? Is this making some sense to you? Is that? Let me just give me a sense of whether there's too much information too quickly, or if you would like me to go over anything, because I will be kind of building on this as I round the corner to kind of provide an understanding of how the human body relates to this kind of Tesla reality I'm describing.
Yeah, everything makes sense. You're doing a great job. So, by all means, continue.
Right. So, when I was kind of plugging along in my life and trying to, understand this or figure out that, or, had this experience and wanted to integrate over here and wanted to integrate that aspect of my personality, it occurred to me along the way that that essentially what I was doing was I was somehow finding a place for elements that were in my life that were opposite to each other. And so I remember, for instance, that I spent maybe, let's say, 8 years of my life at one point in my life, kind of in the backdrop of my days, and I was at this time working as a lawyer and raising some children and whatnot, and backdrop of all of that, I was attempting to understand that anything that happened in my life, or anything that I could look to that happened, let's say, in the world, whether presently or historically, was also part of me in some fundamental way. And so in this little journey, this is one of these sub-journeys that I took in life. Basically, I would look at, let's say, a historical event like, some form of war that was, let's say, really bothersome to me, or that, triggered some sort of emotional response in me, as if I were somehow separate from that, and as if that event was, let's say, somehow not me, in the sense that I would never do that. That would be, let's say, myself separating from that reality. And so what I would do in that instance is I would look at, kind of try to find a way that I could define whatever I was looking at as something that was also me. So anything that bothered me, particularly stuff that bothered me, I would spend some time whenever I felt that bother, and I would pursue bothers, in the plural. Actively, when I had some time, I would, look out to see if there was something around that I could find that could bother me, so that I could kind of pursue this line of inquiry, whether that thing which bothered me, which I called not me, was also me in some way. Now, I won't go into, let's say, the details of, the myriad of things that I processed during those 8 years. But at the end of those 8 years, something very interesting happened. I had reached a point where in my relations to events in the world, to historical events in the world, to situations, to people, to friends, family, loved ones, to my relation to my own feelings, I reached a point where I could no longer determine what was me and what was not me. And that was a very interesting moment because something happened inside me at that time. And it was significant enough that I knew my life had changed at quite a deep level. When I reflected on that later, what I realized was that what I was doing during those 8 years where I was processing this matter of what is me, what is not me, is that I was bringing into, you might say, coherence, or I was bringing into resonance two opposite modes in my life, the mode called me and the mode called not me. And at some point of that, of essentially following that trail, which you might consider a bit of a spiritual journey, though it was fundamentally really strongly emotional journey, fundamentally to me. At some point, the distinction between me and not me collapsed, and I saw the two as simply one. So that I was no longer separate from all of these things that happened, whether in my life or not in my life. It's like the word "my" there took on this ambiguous quality of being both me and not me simultaneously. So, let me just continue a little bit with my own experience, and then I'll round back to this understanding of kind of scalar science and how it fits with what I experienced. So, I knew at that time that in having taken this really deep kind of emotional dive in my life and having kind of brought this coherence to my relating side, I knew that my mind, or that my mental aspect, wasn't quite up to snuff in that regard. That is, the things I could feel after that time, and the way they felt and the way I felt, felt smooth and coherent. Whereas in my mind, there was still this kind of jumbled reality that really, showed a kind of disorder that had disappeared in my emotional, relational realm. What I then decided was that, well, I've got the key here because I had this, this coherence devolve onto me in the emotional realm. I certainly can find it in the mental realm. And so I spent, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years, kind of like in the backdrop again to some degree, but by that time I had left the practice of law and now was doing inner work relatively full time. And so I spent some good energy looking at my mind and looking at how my mind operates, looking at language, which had always been a lifelong interest of mine, looking at the nature of concepts and conceptuality. And what built out of that was that I saw that at the very base of both language and concept, language and idea, at the very base of that thing that we call mental activity was this oppositional element, and it appeared as from the way I saw it, it took the form of fundamental duals or dualities. All those kind of mental dualities that define how we view and how we think and how we talk, et cetera, like at the fundamental base, for instance, relative and absolute. Or let's take the fundamental duality called particular and general. Every time a person talks, they are using words in such a fashion that they are at the very same time talking about something particular. Let's say I'm talking about a bottle of water, for instance. So I have a bottle of water beside me right now, and I'm talking about it. And I'm pointing, in my mind's eye to this bottle, and it's this particular bottle here. And there's no other bottle that is particularly here. This is the only one. But embedded in that understanding or in that description is not only the particular aspect, it's the general aspect, whereby I'm talking here about a bottle. And a bottle is a general category, and it's distinct from other general categories like, desks and whatever else. So what I realized is that at the very root of mental activity is this polarity aspect. And I then kind of set my mind to find out what the relationship was between what I saw as these kind of fundamental polarities. And I kind of saw them line up. It's, for instance, if you take relative and absolute, and the other polarity I mentioned, particular and general, it becomes, with a little bit of investigation, it becomes obvious that particular is a relative term and kind of lines up with on the relative side, whereas general is an absolute term and lines up with absolutivity. And so I saw that the mental element had this fundamental divide in it. On the one side was relative, particular, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. On the other side was absolute, general, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And at some point in trying to understand the relationship between these two fundamental sides of the human mental, or at least the mental reality that I experienced as mental, at some point in time, something again happened to me. And I just woke up one morning and I realized, wow, it's like I get it now. I understand what the relationship is. I couldn't, really express it very articulately at that time, but I knew that I got it. And I knew that I got it in the same fashion that I had experienced with my emotional development and process. And so what I saw from that was that wow, the mental and emotional processes, at least as I had experienced them, were basically fundamentally the same. They were, in fact, a process based on bringing this fundamental duality that existed inside me, whether emotional duality or mental duality, bringing it into some sort of fundamental coherence or resonance. So that was the process that kind of preceded my kind of following up with a more, let's say, scientific description of what had happened to me, because basically, it's like in anyone's life, something happens, and then later on you kind of can kind of figure out, what it was, but the experience comes first. And so for me, the experience came first in those two realms foundationally. And later on, I started realizing that basically, yes, this was a play of polarity, and that the resolving point in time was when a given fundamental polarity came into harmony, came into resonance, came into fundamental relation, as, let's say, yin is to yang. And that polarity mirrored, in a sense, the polarity that is this reality called manifestation. So it's foundationally based and it's fundamental. And then I realized that, well, scientifically, that this experience I had is mirrored, in a sense, scientifically, in the Tesla coil. That the Tesla coil, being an electromagnetic device, operates on the basis of polarity, and operates on the basis of that polarity being in fundamental resonance. So, if Tesla were around, I'm sure he would say yes, that his science is entirely about resonance. So then it occurred to me that, well, looking at the Tesla coil, what I see is that, let's say, on the secondary side of the Tesla coil circuit, you have this open circuit configuration where you just have two electronics components, one being a capacitor, which is, a globe, or it's a toroidal donut-looking shaped thing that sits typically on top. And below that, and connected to it, you have an inductor, which is essentially a coil, or a coil of wire. And these two operate oppositionally in polarity. And they are, in essence, what I realized, they are, in essence, kind of schematic representatives of what in the human configuration is the head and the gut. So let me just ask the listeners now, just to kind of like park what I've said for just a moment. And what I'm going to do is just kind of now describe a little bit of the human constitution as I see it. And then I will come back and I will kind of pull things together a little bit better. So when the human being is in the womb, there develops at some point in time a little bud of neurons, this neuronal material, that grows and grows and grows. And at some point slightly later than that earlier point, that neuronal mass splits in two. Now, very interestingly, one half of that mass kind of floats around upward and becomes the human brain, and the other half becomes the human gut. Now, the human brain, as everybody knows, is somewhat circular, a little bit shaped like a sphere, and can be said to operate electrically, so that, up in the human brain we have basically this kind of electrical powerhouse that operates on some typical electronic understandings and some atypical understandings. But fundamentally, the human brain is this place of light and electricity. And then if you go down below to the gut is the place, for me, and this is how I characterize it, is the place of feeling. For me, the brain doesn't really feel in that sense. The gut, on the other hand, is an emotional powerhouse. That is, it is the kind of like the motive energy that I have experienced in my life is always coming from my gut. If I feel, let's say, go back a little bit in time, somebody slights me and I feel some reaction, boom, that reaction is taking place in my gut. Or if I feel, let's say, anxiety, that anxiety is taking place in my gut. Now, the head has its own stories it tells around all of that energy, but it's not really a kind of feeling energy per se. It's more like an energy of images and probabilities and whatever else. If I'm feeling anxiety in my gut, well, my head might be spinning a whole bunch of pictures about how that anxiety very possibly might occur in my life, and everybody's had that experience. But the human constitution, then, is this kind of polarized constitution where you have this electrical element called the head, and you have this magnetic element or emotional element called the gut. And those two are in fundamental relation. And if you look at kind of your experience in life, you will see that they're always kind of operating together. That is, every time I have a feeling, I have a thought. And conversely, every time I have a thought, I also have a feeling. And parenthetically, some of the best thinkers on this planet, or let me put it this way, the best thinkers on this planet, are people who use to their thinking advantage the feeling complement to thinking. That is, they are always in touch with what they feel when they're thinking. So the two are actually very powerful. So then it occurred to me that, well, there's a third element in the human constitution that, apart from, let's say, just the general skeletal aspect of the human body, kind of makes up a large kind of basis of the rest of what the human body kind of is comprised of. And that extra third element is the heart. So the heart it's this thing that pumps, and it pumps blood, and blood is made of, among other things, red blood cells, which carry iron, and the heart's pumping mechanism creates an enormous amount of energy, and there is a definite signature that the heart creates in terms of its energetic stamp. And the blood in the heart flows in a circle. And I thought, well, you know what, all of that and all of those functions are just like the closed circuit element of a Tesla coil. And in that closed circuit element of the Tesla coil, basically what you find is a pulsing electricity that goes around in a circle. And in the human constitution, you find in the heart circulatory system, you find a pulsing system that goes around in a circle. And not only that, because of the presence of this very strong electromagnetic energy coming off the heart, including the large presence of iron in that circulatory system, and iron being something that is magnetic and attracts magnetic energies. What you have there is fundamentally a closed circuit operating system that provides the fundamental energetic stamp of the human being That is, who you are is how your heart beats, fundamentally. In a Tesla coil, the primary side of the circuit creates the energetic stamp, or what you might call the frequency of what is then passed on to the secondary side of the circuit, the open circuit element, where it is fed into what I like to call the non-local field. And so kind of putting all this together, what I realized from my own experience of opposition and polarity, and from my understanding of the relationship of the various elements of, how I was even just simply physically constructed, and from my investigations of Tesla science, is that the human being, as I kind of first understood it, is something like a walking Tesla coil. And you might say, go a little bit kind of a different direction with that, to say that the Tesla coil is actually kind of a stepped-down version of the human architecture. So the human architecture, in my opinion, is fundamental and universal. Tesla, in his genius, and through the essentially non-local means by which he picked up his information, was able to tap into that reality, kind of draw from it, and basically sketch out a kind of device that basically operates in a way to operate outside the confines of what is typically called electromagnetics and into the larger universe through the non-local field. So that's a bit of a technical description. I gave you there a little bit of my own experience of coming into internal resonance, related it a little bit to configuration of a Tesla coil and how the human architecture is similarly configured. And basically, from that understanding, what I see is that the human being has an enormous potential just in the configuration of the way the human being is configured to operate in any manner that a human being could conceive, given sufficient development of any given person. So there's a bit of a long introduction and description, Andrew. Let me just pause here to just to ask if you have any kind of directions you want to go with that, or any questions you want to ask me about kind of how I perceive that all of this works, and how people can perhaps activate those potentials, what those potentials are, etc.
Well, you did a good job on the science behind it all. One thing I'd like to talk about is the whole thing about the gut, the heart, and the head. I mean, you talked about how the head, that's electric. People would associate that with male energy, and also the heart, that's magnetic. And the gut, people would associate that with magnetic and female. Well, first of all, going with the gut, going with the heart, I'm a little confused. What's the difference between, they say go with your gut or go with your heart? Do they refer to the same thing, or is there a difference there? I'm a little lost.
Right, that's a great question. I find that area of kind of understanding is largely confused. Typically, when people look at the human being, they say that, well, there's two aspects of the human. There's the head and the heart. My understanding is no, there's three aspects. We have the head, the gut, and the heart. What people call the heart, I think what they mean by that is the gut. I think they mean the emotional, kind of energetic aspect, feelings, how I feel in my relationships, how I feel about my work, about my job, how I feel about anything at all, is something that is located in the gut. It's not a heart reality per se. To my understanding, the heart is the resolving third, you might call it. Or let's put it this way, the heart is the center point stillness between the head and the gut. Let me put this a third way. The heart is the middle point of the infinite eight circular energetic reality called the head and the gut. So if you imagine that the head is the top of an infinite eight, the infinity sign, and the gut is the bottom circle, the heart is that point of contact between the two, which is just a point in between the top and the bottom circles. So, Andrew, my sense is that the heart is everything. It's all encompassing, just like love is all encompassing. But it is not really something that is kind of what people typically understand it to be, the place of feeling. It is a place of feeling because it encompasses everything, which includes feeling. But it also encompasses, in my understanding, thinking. That is, it's the resolving third. It's that which is, in a sense, outside both feeling and thinking, as the kind of master center point of absolute balance between the two, when those two are come into harmony and balance together.
Thanks a lot. One thing that's similarly related to this, David Icke, in his recent book, The Perception Deception, I recently read it. One thing he talked about how the difference between the gut and the heart, he had said that has a lot to do with what happened to humanity in regards to the fall of Atlantis. Atlantis was it wasn't a utopia. It had its own conflicts and such, but it was mostly a heart-based society. But after the fall of Atlantis, the Archon control system getting more control than it did before, we changed from a heart-based society into a gut-based, from like a heart chakra to a solar plexus chakra kind of society. Can you go along with that and say, yeah, that's probably what actually happened?
Yeah, to some extent, I agree with what he's saying there. That when I look at life on this planet, it appears to me that in the most general sense, what we're doing here is we are essentially learning to live more as individually self-sufficient beings. That is, in a more individuated manner, or you might say, with a more individual self-identity, i.e., breaking out of essentially a group form of self-identity, and the individualizing element is in the emotional realm. It's in the emotional world. So when you feel something, that's you feeling it. Like nobody else is feeling, right? It's just you there, feeling that feeling, and whatever that feeling means and whatever it's doing, it's you. And so what David Icke is saying about the Archon presence. Well, I take that in a positive vein to say that part of why we're here in this layer of density that we're existing in on this planet is to individualize in that sense, is to come to know ourselves as individual beings, to know ourselves as, let's say, as unique beings, as different, and in that difference, finding that difference is something that sustains and is also, true to polarity, because everybody else is different in the same way I'm different. We're all the same. But that's kind of my take on things like that. The Archon presence. If you look at descriptions of, let's say, Archon behaviors and Archon happenings, Archon events, Archon-related events. Basically, what defines those for me is that all of those have this kind of character of kind of a very strong individual stamp, so that it breaks apart, this kind of group, or it has broken apart that kind of group, and you using some pretty nasty means sometimes, for sure. I'm not discounting that at all, but just looking at it and trying to find a general characterization of what it means to be Archon. Yes, it's reptilian. Reptilian is lower in the sense that it's based in the intestine. If you look at, let's say, any reptile on this planet, snake being a good example or a good representative, a snake is fundamentally almost all intestine, and you could. And then just following my characterization, you would expect it then to be basically all individual in the sense that cannot relate, right? And basically that's true. You can't relate to a snake, right? You can't. They're not going to relate to you in the way that we can relate to a dog, the way we can relate to a cat. A cat is way above a snake. No, the snake is reptile in the sense that it's intestine prominent. So that's my take on that. Does that kind of work for you, or?
Yeah, it works for me. One thing about Tesla that's kind of controversial. I didn't ask Patricia Corey this when I had her on my show, but I believe she did actually talk about this in one of her Alfred Weber interviews. She said that Tesla, he may have wanted to share his research with humanity to help them out, but in reality, the people that seeded his consciousness here on Earth, they did not have good intentions for humanity. You can sort of think of his work as being analogous to what CERN does, CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, to totally screw around with our reality, manipulate time and everything to change our reality in negative ways and alter timelines and whatnot. And Tesla's technology would do something similar to that in negative ways, even though he himself seemed like a good person. Could you perhaps subscribe to that theory? You have any ideas whether that could be true or not?
My sense, let me first say I don't become negative about negativity. So that for me, negativity exists always as an element of anything at all. So let me just expand on that for just a second. Anytime, anything that we can call movement, which is basically anything in any experience whatsoever, anything we can call movement represents the creation of something new simultaneously with the destruction of that which was left behind, which we now call the past. So that any form of movement, and the present is always new because it's always in movement in that fundamental sense. Any form of movement, so everything at all, contains always the two elements of construction and destruction, so that the old is destroyed in a sense, and the new is constructed. I have a kind of a dualistic take, as you might call it, on this notion of negativity, where I see it as a kind of a dual partner in the universe, in terms of it's present always as an inseparable element of what could be called creative. And if you go to, let's say, Hindu scriptures and the descriptions of their gods and whatnot, the Shiva character is a god of destruction, which is always co-present with actually two other gods, but one of them is the god of creation. But there you see the number 3 again, which is certainly Tesla-like. So let me bend to this answer back to Tesla per se. That Tesla, his science, I agree, was ahead of its time in terms of being able to be properly accepted and properly used, and in fact safely used. in the world at the time that he was walking on this planet. But I don't ascribe to the view that there was something fundamentally negative about, in the sense of undesirable or something that should be rejected about Tesla's understanding or his science.
Thanks for giving your take on that. I guess we'll switch gears now and talk about ET disclosure. Maybe something will come up. I'll go back to this Tesla coil and scalar humanity stuff. But ET disclosure, you seem to have a strong connection to that. You did a lot of work, donation-wise and such. So could you explain to us why you feel you should play a role in the subject of ET disclosure? Why is it so important to you?
Yeah, ET disclosure. Well, I spent my life when I was in my let's call it my university years, which was a fairly long time in my life because I hung out in university for quite a while, not knowing what else to do, because I had this burning question inside I had to answer, which was what on earth is this place? What is Earth? What is life? And what is life in the universe? And what is the role of life, including the role of humanity, in this kind of strange place called the universe? So I set out to answer that question, and fundamentally, all the answers I was given in the various kind of ways that it was given, whether through books or through let's say courses I may have taken, or through speakers I listened to, etc. All the answers were they left me in a state of dissonance, and so it became a bit of a project for me, Andrew, to kind of rid myself of that dissonance in if I could, and so I spent a long time trying to get rid of the dissonance, and where that led eventually was my investigations led off planet to the ET realm, and it was only when connection was made, or you might say remade, depending on your perspective. Only when that connection was made did the dissonance in some material way fall away. So basically, it having seen that the universe only makes sense for me with the added element of ET life, etc., of understanding what Richard Dolan has called the UFO. Having seen that, that then became my life, and really, it was like jumping into jumping into a rabbit hole that never ends. So I decided that's relevant to me. That's very relevant, and I want to play a part in what that big game means called disclosure, and we can talk about that if you want. I have my own peculiar understanding, of course.
Well, the whole thing about ET disclosure, some people say it's sort of not really necessary. I mean, would you subscribe to the idea that you need to get the mainstream media and the government to acknowledge it in order for it to be truly official disclosure, or not?
Well, I hear what you're asking with that question. That there's a sense that anybody can find disclosure on their own terms, using their own efforts and whatever else. I agree with that. There is also, you might say, just a huge element that official disclosure brings in the sense that pre-disclosure reality is in a sense a kind of a matrix, and that matrix is not just about ETs and information about ETs. No, it goes deep into every aspect of human life, so far as I can see. So that for me, disclosure implies a certain kind of fundamental change on this planet. and implies a fundamental shift in the way that we find ourselves relating on this planet, the way we find ourselves producing on this planet, a fundamental change to our economy. All of that is implied. So yes, there is the personal element, and that every individual, of course, on their own terms, needs to decide their own mind about the matter if they want to decide it. And there is a kind of what you could call let's say, a social institutional element, which involves government agencies and all of the secrecy and all of the institutional structuring around that secrecy, not to mention the structuring of our education, the structuring of what we learn as science, the structuring of, the list goes on and on and on. Basically, everything revolves in our institutions to keep this ET element at bay. And that's enormous. So I look at the on the social side, on the institutional side, I look at the enormity of what will change when government basically says, yes, we have been visited. We have visitors as we speak, and there's a lot of information we got to tell you.
Yes, and the whole idea of ETs showing themselves in the very near future seems like 2017 is the date a lot of people are talking about, and I do caution people whenever I talk about this subject, please don't get a couch potato mentality and think the ETs are going to come and save us. You got to do your part to raise the consciousness of humanity, regardless of what year it may happen. So some people are concerned that if the ETs do show themselves in the near future, whatnot, there's going to be chaos in the streets like it was Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast. I remember in my roundtable discussion with you and Steve Bissett said, no, that was then, this is now. It's not like that anymore. And in my interview with the ET contactee Ray Kusalan, she said, no, the people are going to be able to handle it. Their consciousness will be elevated enough by that time to be able to handle it pretty well, while some people would certainly beg to differ on that. But the idea of humans not going nuts and crazy and running in the streets, if they saw ETs, do you think that would happen or would not happen in this day and age?
Yeah, I don't think it would happen if disclosure happened now. I think it would. I think disclosure can be very upsetting to a given type of person. But I think we're beyond. Societally, I think we're beyond there being any sort of fundamental breakdown in terms of, let's say personally, of people finding themselves not being able to handle it, or let's say a breakdown within our social relations or institutions. I don't think that will happen. But that my sense of my broader sense of that issue is that in terms of let's say the management of this issue, it all looks managed to me. When I look at what's happening out there in the world, it appears to me that and particularly with the ET UFO issue, that there is something that might be called a management plan at play, and that if you kind of peer into it, what I have found looking into it is that there is, in addition to what people very typically talk about as the negative elements of coming into this broader understanding, where you have to, divest yourself of all of that nonsense that was said and that was, taught and told and basically hammered in everybody. Everybody has to kind of work through that, and make no bones that's a form of deception, and that deception goes very deep, and it's not a walk in the park to divest oneself of what could possibly be virtually a lifetime of having been deceived, depending on the age of the person. That's not an easy task. on the other hand, it appears to me that that at a deeper base of what's happening out there, that that the management of this issue, and I don't leave that management simply in human hands, and we can talk about that, but the management of this issue also has a caring aspect. And fundamentally, I think, to give you my baseline opinion, I think that the entire reality of the way this earth has been managed, shepherded, even controlled, admits of a caring, compassionate element at its base. So that we are not going to, on the disclosure side, we're not going to see disclosure before people are ready. You could say, what purpose would that serve, really, and who could want that as a net result on this planet? I wouldn't want that personally. And my sense of the hierarchy of and admittedly, when I look into that hierarchy, at some point there's, I'm looking into the clouds, right? And the rest of the hierarchy is above the clouds. Can't really see it, but the sense I get, the feeling I get, Andrew, is that there's some deep caring up there, and that yes, I think disclosure is something that people are ready for, and yes, I think disclosure is happening quite quickly, and yes, I think that there still are a few paces we need to walk through to get to the point where, okay, yeah, you and I are ready, and let's say the listeners to this program are ready. It could be helpful to start seeding some of this information more broadly, so that it's not such a shock when people wake up one morning and it's now told to them that the universe you thought existed doesn't exist. So I kind of like 2017. Yeah, that feels fairly. 2017, 2018, maybe 2016. Maybe that's a little too soon. 2020, whatever it is. These times, in my experience, the years are clicking on really quickly. But I think something big is going to happen fairly soon, where something is going to be acknowledged, and the universe is going to have a very different look about it after that point in time, because we will finally round that corner, and there will be a social consensus, and we will have to work through a lot of what we have to work through to, like I said, divest ourselves of all the deception that kind of necessarily accompanied this entire process, to realize that we are part of a larger universe, and it is very alive, and part of that living universe is right here, and it's time to open our hearts to a much larger reality. So that's kind of how I see it in terms of general timelines. But I agree with that. That when I look out into what is disclosed in, let's say, the media these days. Today I was plunking around on the internet and came across an article in Mother Jones magazine talking about why UFO people's types are looking forward to Hillary being president if she wins. John Podesta was he's purportedly going to be part of Hillary's campaign, and John Podesta has had a history of wanting to be involved, wanting to disclose UFO and ET realities. So here we have Mother Jones magazine talking about Stephen Bassett, and talking about John Podesta, and talking about UFOs and ETs. And yeah, there's still a little bit of that kind of joking element where there, slight undertone of ridicule there. Oh, fair enough. But this is Mother Jones magazine, and I've seen a lot of other news articles over the last year or so, and they seem to be coming from my experience of them, they appear to be coming more frequently. To think that, okay, what we're entering into here is a form of, let's say, slow disclosure from the top, where the notion of, we are living in a very different universe, where that notion is being seeded into the general awareness essentially through the, you might call it right now, the fringe of the mainstream media. But I have also seen mainstream media articles on and speaking in, not simply about ETs just simply to ridicule, but speaking in positive terms about, asking a question as if wanting to, let's say, nudge the readership to in the direction of the reader actually asking the question for the reader's own self. What has your experience been? I tend to follow news here and there, and sometimes I'm lacking a little bit in terms of following mainstream news because it's really not that relevant to me. But what's your experience, Andrew?
In regards to the type of news I follow?
Mm. In regards to, have you seen an uptick in kind of what might be called soft disclosure?
Well, when it comes to news and all that, seems like InfoWars is my news of choice. Not really an ET site there. I just go with the flow of watching what's on YouTube and watch a documentary every so often. Not really up to date on current stuff unless something big comes on, but I just really sit back, watch YouTube, whether it be TT disclosure or anything like that, and I haven't really paid direct attention to see if the documentaries in general talk about more soft disclosure, so I can't to give a definitive answer as to yes, based on what I've seen in all my documentary and such watching experience, that there is more or less than there was in the not too distant past. But I can certainly say that people in general, regardless of whether or not the soft disclosure is coming out more often, are, I guess, more accepted to the ET idea.
Yeah, that's my sense too. Is that particularly when I talk with younger generations, if let's say there's 5 generations out there kind of plodding around on the planet right now. When I talk to younger generations, I find almost an automatic openness to the issue, which can be a little bit surprising to me because of the I went to university in the 1980s, and during that time the ridicule factor was at nearing basically an all-time high. Probably peaked in the 1990s, I suppose, and but since that time, people who were born in, let's say, the 1990s, or born after that time, I find them quite open to and wanting to discuss it, and finding that it's relevant, and in fact finding that the older kind of theories about what this universe is all about and what life on Earth is all about, this is not relevant to them. That's the sense I get.
It's certainly appearing more in our pop culture with shows like UFO Hunters, Hangar 1, and Ancient Aliens. Since I mentioned that, do you, there's certainly some brainwashing in those shows because, the History Channel, in the end, it's controlled by Disney, which is a major Illuminati operation. And Bill Burns, when I had him on my show, he all but acknowledged that the reason UFO Hunters was canceled was because they were exposing a little too much sensitive information that the powers that be did not want exposed. But in general, do you think that shows like UFO Hunters, Hangar 1, and even Ancient Aliens, they're worthwhile to watch because they're like maybe diamond in the rough TV shows that can play a role in perhaps waking up people to these things?
Yeah, I think all of those. I think all of those formats play a role. Like I think movies play a role. Let's say the latest of which was Interstellar. Latest kind of like off-world reality show movie. And to kind of place these shows and movies in a slightly larger context, it appears to me that with the with the development of the internet, that essentially what was unleashed on the planet was a necessary change that will happen in fairly short order. Once people have access to information like the internet gives, and yes, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation on the internet, etc. But let's put it this way: the truth is out there, and there is truth on the internet, no question about it. And the fact that people have access now to that internet truth, to the truth of what is spoken about, whatever that truth is meant to any given individual, that is going to cause huge ramifications in society, and it already has. It's like we look back before the time of the internet, and life was very different. It seems almost archaic, but that was only 15 years ago. That's not a long period of time. So if you let's say I like to make the analogy to the printing press, which is a bit of a direct analogy, but printing press, the world changed when the printing press came out in, I think it was 1600s. Now the internet is 10,000 times what the printing press is, or a million times. And so the scope of change that is necessarily implied by the kind of information transfer and information sharing that the internet allows is enormous. And so what I see in the backdrop of, let's say, movies about off-world and ET realities, about various forms of shows like shows about Area 51, ancient aliens, et cetera, all of that seems to be working kind of fundamentally as a unit on an informational level to basically open people to this reality that there's a different universe out there. So I see the reality of the internet, and Alex Jones is doing an awesome job collating a whole bunch of news relevant to people kind of popping out of the matrix. Well, that's great stuff. He's able to do that because there is a freer flow of information on the planet, generally speaking. And so in that freer flow of information, I also see, these movies and shows and whatnot, and I see the entirety of that as working its way in a kind of a clockwork, or let's say a ratcheting fashion, kind of a one-way ratcheting fashion to open people to these larger realities. And I think that process accelerates. It's like you could put it this way, that knowledge is cumulative, just like interest on a debt. Knowledge is cumulative, and at some point the effect of knowledge in its accumulation goes parabolic. And I think we've reached that point where the where kind of societal knowing has started curving upward into that parabolic functioning, where the acceleration is going to, let's basically put on your seatbelt, because things are going to go very quickly from here on in. That's my sense.
One thing about ET disclosure that you don't hear much talked about, the idea that the ETs will not be able to go along with the consciousness raising of planet Earth. Some people have talked about how, well, first off, you subscribe to the idea that many of our political and corporate leaders are reptilian aliens or other demonic entities masquerading behind the holographic mask of a human to further their agenda. Then you might subscribe to the idea that as Mother Earth's consciousness rises, they will not be able to withstand and handle the consciousness rising. So more often than you used to see, you will be able to see these political and corporate leaders shapeshift, like during their speeches and such. You may see their eyes shapeshift into vertical pupils and such, or their skin might appear more greenish, among other things some people have said. Do you think that as Mother Earth's vibrational frequency is rising in the near future, you will see more like things like that, like shape-shifting in like interviews and TV show appearances by our political and corporate leaders that are actually ETs.
Well, I'd like to see some shape-shifting where people start talking about more real things, personally speaking. But in terms of your question there, I don't really subscribe to the view that there will be a category of people or a large number of people left behind in this process. And this just basically arises from my understanding that, in the process that we are undergoing on this planet, people who we call corporate leaders they're kind of playing a role that's kind of a cookie cutter role cut out for them in the sense. If you look at any company, the CEO of a company is basically a fungible quantity. That is, the CEO, has some personal contribution to make, but every CEO will make some personal contribution. So every CEO is the same on that ground. So CEOs basically follow they forward the interests of the company, or they're gone. And so I don't see there to be much room in a sense for CEOs to do other than kind of what is cut out for them. And that includes a lot of what could be considered a lot of nasty stuff that's happening. But in my broader view of things, that nasty stuff is, we're all implicated in it. I don't see anybody as kind of standing outside of what anything could be, outside of what anything could be called as evil or as undesirable. So my sense is that, let me just make that practical in one way. I'll give you an image of, let's say, a war. So you've got all these corporations. They want to create a war, and let's say the oil companies, they want to profit from it. The Bechtels and Halliburtons, they want to profit from it by doing engineering, et cetera, et cetera. So they march a bunch of people over to go fight in a war, so that these companies can make profit. On the ground, what you have are individuals pulling triggers. And every individual is responsible for every action, in my opinion, that they perform. And so if there weren't this kind of storehouse of individuals who are very willing to pull triggers, then these things we call companies wouldn't gain a foothold in rallying people to war. So basically, the way I view things is that we're all in this together. And there are differences, and I respect those differences. And yes, there are some pretty fundamental differences, like, let's say, a reptilian character. A reptilian character is, let's call that kind of person a person who operates on the basis of service to self. Well, service to self can imply that, my needs are not going to be met, they're going to be overridden, they're going to be crushed, whatever. I appreciate that, and yes, that's something we're going to have to deal with. But it appears to me that selfhood is a part of every person's life. And so somebody has to fill the role of operating on the basis of, a more directed sense of selfhood. It's up to us to come into some sort of relationship, and relationship of coherence, of, in that sense, working to find how we can, as people, find harmony And that harmony is going to be found amidst all of our differences, and those differences include those kinds of characterizations that you just spoke about to me here.
And speaking of harmony, I noticed that your Facebook avatar is the yin-yang symbol. I'm assuming you take some strong meaning and significance behind the yin-yang symbol. I mean, the Chinese, was it the Chinese who created that symbol, or was it maybe someone else and they adapted it? They knew what they were talking about when they created it. So I guess if you are an expert on the whole yin-yang philosophy, go ahead and enlighten us on it. You chose it as your avatar, after all.
Yeah, sure. Well, yin-yang is kind of, that symbol was created by the Taoists, spelled Tao, and yes, they were Chinese. For me, the yin-yang symbol is a symbol of duality and a symbol of the the fundamental identity of polar opposites. So if you look at the yin-yang symbol, basically it's a circle, and in that circle, if you were to take a pen, just draw a circle on a piece of paper, and then you take your pen and you draw an S in the middle of that circle, basically the S being the outline of the yin and the yang. Essentially what is happening there is, with a single line, you are drawing both yin and yang, so that what yin is, so is yang. Yet they're opposite in the sense that what yin is, yang is not, right? So if you look at, let's say, the small tail end of the white squiggly figure, next to that tail end, what you're going to find is the head, the larger aspect of the black figure. And so the tail and the head are drawn by a single swoosh of the pen from the top of the circle, let's say. And when you get to the bottom, you will be drawing the head of the white and the tail of the black. But if you were to look at both of these, the white and the black, they're actually absolutely the same, but they're absolutely different in the sense that they're absolutely opposite. So for me, the yin-yang symbol is really a symbol of duality. But it's, what I mean by duality is nothing, let's say, undesirable or sinister, or something that needs to be overcome in a sense. What I mean by duality is that anything that is in a relationship of yin to yang, that relationship is fundamentally a relationship of identity. That is, the two, where you draw one, you draw the other, necessarily. So that, let's say, for instance, in my relationships, when I say I am this and not that, what I am fundamentally saying is that I am defining myself in reference to that which I am not. I am therefore defining myself as being what I am only because I can say I'm not that. So that I cannot separate myself from what I'm not, because my entire identity of who I am in particular is just like yin and yang, is essentially wrought by my relationship with everything and everybody else. There's a profound statement that Niels Bohr once said, which kind of encapsulates this yin-yang understanding, and that statement is that each one is as all the others are. So that, let's say you look at a Persian carpet. A Persian carpet has all these lines going kind of all sorts of directions, and if you if you kind of like look at the way those lines intersect in one part of the Persian carpet, you get a kind of like a circle, or let's say a small circle in that area of the carpet. Well, that circle doesn't just exist of itself. No, it exists as a part of a pattern where you have all of these lines coming in to that point. And the shape of that point from all of these lines then it emerges as the shape of this thing that I can call a circle. Well, that thing might be me. I am shaped by everything that has come into me. I'm shaped by the place I was born. I'm shaped by my family upbringing, by my family of origin. I'm shaped by, my community, by the language spoken, by, all of the elements, by the air I breathe and the kinds of food I ate and the people in my life, and all of that goes into forming who I understand myself to be. And who I understand myself to be is therefore, in a sense, would not exist but for all of that. So when I look at the yin-yang symbol, when I see that single line drawing both yin and yang simultaneously, what I see is a symbol of the reality of life itself, so that each person is fundamentally related to every other person. And in fact, if you want to bring a little quantum physics into this understanding, each person exists as if in a holographic field where every other person and every other thing in the universe, in fact, is related to that person. So if you want to take yin yang really broadly, and I tend to enjoy kind of flying to those heights, every person carries the vibration of everything else in the universe in them, and that vibration vibrates in particular as that person, but yet it is still the vibration of everything else. Paradoxical, you could say. So yeah, no, I love that symbol, and the yin yang is a symbol of polarity, basically, where you have white and black, and you have these kind of oppositely placed figures, which are, despite being opposite, they're the exact same shape. So you have both absolute difference and absolute sameness, characterizing these two yin-yang figures. And because you have a single line drawing the both, and because they form a complete circle, that complete circle might be called the third, which is the resolution of the two, or the resolution of duality itself as fundamentally a unity. So that's my kind of slightly subtler take on yin yang, and I see it as a kind of an operational principle that you could bring it down to how Tesla electronics operates. You could bring it into how, let's say, the human brain operates. Let's say left hemisphere, right hemisphere. Left hemisphere is part, and right hemisphere is whole. Left hemisphere, you could say, is particle, right hemisphere is wave. Or you could say left hemisphere is linear, right hemisphere is circular. Those two are fundamentally opposites, but they're yin-yang in the sense that whenever you say one of a pair of opposites, you necessarily imply the other, so that the one cannot be ever viewed on its own, and also must be viewed as in fundamental relation to that which it is fundamentally not, which is its opposite. So as soon as you say, for instance, particle, left brain, you imply by particle, you imply that which it is not, which is wave or right brain. So for me, that's all yin yang. Does that?
Yeah, that makes sense. But let's take it a step further, because it's a symbol of polarity and duality in a sense. Some would say if you go up to a higher dimension or density, whichever term makes more sense to measure density for you. Some people say there's a difference, some say there isn't. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is, once you get to higher dimensions or densities, there would be no polarity or duality, so those people would not understand the concept of yin-yang, the entities in those realities, those maybe above the fifth dimension, I suppose, or maybe in the fourth dimension there would be none of that. So what do you have to say about that idea?
I think there must be something to that. But I kind of, my fallback, I've thought about that issue a fair amount, and my fallback kind of position on that is that I don't think that's true. So that every time, let's put it this way. If you have, and then I'll qualify. So I'll say something, I'll tell you why I think that's wrong, and then I'll qualify to say why I think it's kind of right. So it's kind of wrong and right in that sense in my mind. So, but why is it wrong? Every time, let's say you take a sixth dimensional being, and let's call that being, let's say Ashtar. Now, I don't know if Ashtar, the channel being, is a sixth dimensional being. Well, let's just call this being Ashtar. What I have done by calling this being Ashtar is I have identified one being as opposed, separated that one being from everything and everyone else. That separation is the separation between the one and the many. So that whenever you have any kind of reference to any single particular one being, person, reality, situation, whatever, whenever you are referring to one, you are implying the many that one is not. So right there you have duality. So the simple fact of existing as an identifiable being or person, the simple fact of existing as such, is duality itself. And I don't see there to be yes, and then here's where I think what you said is right, that yes, I think as you go up these layers of density into higher layers of density, I think the dividing, the how do you put it, the kind of like, I think the separation between the one and everybody else, or me and some other person, or this being or that being, I think the separation becomes kind of less contrasty in a sense, less severe, if that makes sense. And yet I see in the simple ability to identify anything at all, I see the operation of duality. So I think all of manifestation, it doesn't matter whether it's third density or 150th density, however high a person conceives it to go. Any sort of manifestation, I think, is duality itself. You could say, for instance, you could take this to, you could say, for instance, the simple ability to distinguish between fifth density and sixth density shows that there's a separation there, a difference. And whenever you have that separation or difference, whenever you have identifiability as such, you have the one and the many, i.e. you have duality. You have a particular, and then you have, the universal, everything, everyone else. And yet, down here on third density planet Earth, I think this, perhaps what characterizes this place. And I'm as forgetful as anybody else in this, and so I don't have I don't have really have kind of video evidence to prove this necessarily. But my sense is that being here on planet Earth, the feeling of difference is much more distinct. That is, the lines of division, in a sense, dividing me from you, or dividing me from anything, dividing me from that bottle I was talking about earlier, I think I think we're in the zone of high contrast in terms of differences in that sense. So that's a bit of a yes and no answer to your question, but that's kind of where it appears to me.
Okay, that's fine. And since we've had, just so you know, we've got 13 minutes and 20 seconds left on the live feed for the show. I suppose we might close the show talking about what the future holds for, I suppose, ET disclosure. We'll start with timeline of events that you see in the future of ET disclosure and people being able to handle it, and people learning more and accepting more, all the way to the point of when the ETs may actually show themselves, the good ETs, and maybe also when the bad ETs, when their shape-shifting forms will finally reveal to show who's underneath the human form, if that makes sense. So give us a timeline of events of what you think might happen in the near future. I mean, if you don't want to give any specific dates, because some people like Rob Potter say, don't give dates because then you're probably going to have egg in your face. He actually said that in my interview with him. But if you don't want to give dates and say, hey, if I'm wrong, so be it. So what do you see for the future timeline?
Right, and if it's wrong, so be it. No problem. My feeling about the way things are progressing on this planet is that basically everything is speeding up. And like I was saying about the internet and the accumulation of information, the accumulative effect of information, being like interest on a debt, where at some point it goes parabolic, that is, it curves straight up. My sense is that all of life is basically speeding up. And if you look at we're talking about disclosure here, and essentially disclosure is disclosure of some form of information that has been kept secret. And if you kind of unpackage what that word information means in that sense, basically disclosure involves a fundamental reorientation of kind of who we are in our understanding of what the universe is, in our understanding of our own history, where we came from, in our understanding of really what anything that could be called science is all about, in our understanding of all of these issues. Everything is going to, in a sense, flip, because what we're living down here, as you have intimated in the language that you use, is we're basically living in a kind of a confined, fenced off matrix. And basically, in any kind of, like, let's say, confined, fenced off matrix, you have a kind of a control reality, which is unnatural in the sense that it's not a natural form of functioning. It's basically a command and control system. David Icke has made this patently clear that it's a command and control system out there, and they operate according to various kinds of rules. Well, the reality is that natural process cannot be controlled, or let's put it this way, cannot be controlled for too long before the whole thing gives out and the control measures kind of implode upon themselves. You can see this in the way that the stock market has functioned. The stock market is a controlled reality. It's kind of a controlled linear reality. And at some point, the stock market, given the nature of the kind of financial reality underlying it, that financial reality being a financial reality based on debt, and debt having interest eventually goes parabolic. Well, eventually the stock market goes parabolic, and boom, what do you know, let's say in 1929, stock market goes parabolic and everything crashes. Well, essentially the same thing happened in 2008 with the stock market. But Andrew, everything in this kind of like this kind of faux closed system, this kind of false closed system that we're living, this matrix, everything is a control reality. Everything's managed. The entire economy is managed. Stock market's managed. We have management from above with the way we operate in our corporations and our basic productivity. It's all managed. The information is managed. It's all managed through the media. Information managed through all the 6 million intelligence agencies out there. It's all managed, and any form of managed reality is unnatural in that very sense that the rules guiding the management of the process, they can only always ever encompass part of reality itself, because basically by controlling, what you're doing is you're excluding, by that control, you're intentionally excluding some part of reality. Any control system will eventually go parabolic, and by parabolic I mean it's all the processes are going to speed up. So that's kind of what I see on the planet right now. We had the financial fallout of 2008, where where basically everything spiked. Stock market spiked, the price of commodities spiked, et cetera, et cetera. The reality of debt spiked in a huge way. Since that time, just to kind of continue with this, talking about a little bit about the financial world, since that time, the entire stock market and the entire financial world, for its part, has basically been on life support, and that life support is essentially, as I see it, a form of treading water to kind of I think, prepare for a kind of system change for what is going to come after. And if you say, well, if it's a system change, we're talking here about a control system, and a control system is going to change into something, a little bit different from control, I think. So everything's gone parabolic. Life is speeding up. Information is speeding up. Information transfer is speeding up. People are learning. People are finding out, let's say through such sites as Alex Jones, people are waking up to the matrix reality that this planet is. And all of that is happening in real time and is accelerating. So in terms of a timeline, I suppose what I see is that this acceleration is going to continue, and from what I can see in terms of happenings on the ground and in the financial world, in the markets, and from other sources that I have, it looks to me that we're going to see a very significant change, very probably within a few years. But let's put it this way, that let's give it till 2020 that we're going to see enormous changes in our society. And by enormous changes, I mean there's going to be foundational changes at a kind of a root level in the operating system by which this society operates. So, will we have a form of, let's say, authentic and official ET disclosure by 2017? Well, we very well may. That would be within a timeline of acceleration, like I've described, and 2017 is, could be, as much as 2.5 years away if it's the latter part of the year. So I could see that happening. If it happens after 2017, it's not going to be that long. There's not a chance it could be because of the cumulative effect of everything that's happening now and has happened in the last, let's say, 5 or 10 years. So yes, I would say, I suppose there was a large, let's say, contingent of people who kind of felt the 2012 time to have passed without a bang, and yet, when I look back at that time and look what has happened since that time, it looks to me that there was some sort of fundamental shift that occurred back then, and that shift was at I think, a very deep level, and I think people are experiencing the ramifications of that shift at that deep level in terms of what's happening in their lives, and what they're seeing as possibilities for the future. So it's like the future is going to look very different in a couple of years. I would make a bet on that. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think the same too, but again, I just want everybody, don't get a couch potato attitude. Don't think BTs are going to save you. You have to do your part. Humanity, the less sheeple there are, the faster we're going to wake up. So wake up the sheeple. You don't have to do to the sheeple what that guy in the movie They Live did to his friend who wouldn't put the glasses on. That might be going a little bit too far there to beat up the sheeple because they refuse to wake up. But just give them the information. General dialogue probably is the key there. If they want to be stupid and refuse to believe what the evidence shows, they have no choice but to believe. Maybe try forcing it on them to let them know, hey, you're being stupid here. Wake up, will you? You're making things hard for everybody. But that, I believe, is the key to waking up the sheeple. So with that being said, there really isn't any time for another conversation because the live feed will go off in just over 2 minutes. So I guess I'll tell you the same thing I tell all of my guests. And in a sense, you're an exception to this because you came on my show previously for that roundtable discussion. But anyway, the fact is, Tom, one of my goals with this show is to get as many different guests on my show as possible before I give any one specific guest double dips. And you are a fascinating individual, and I have no doubt that if I wanted to, I could do another show with you to discuss a whole slew of things on this stuff and other things. But the fact is, because I'm on a mission to keep getting different people on, I probably will not be asking you to come on my show again, but that's only because I need to give thousands of other fascinating individuals a chance to have some glory on my show. But I promise you, I will make sure this interview gets spread far and wide, uploaded on YouTube and other sources and other mediums. I'll make sure so people will be able to get the very important information in this interview out to themselves and the rest of the world.
Well, thank you, Andrew. It was fun, and I appreciate being on your show, and I appreciate the people listening in the audience, and I wish them an awesome year as it's going to come. It's going to be a year of changes, I think. Buckle that seatbelt because, boy, things are going to speed up.
We're in for an awesome ride for sure. Well, take care, Tom. Namaste. I hope you wish you good luck. Wish you well.
Thank you, Andrew.
Take care.
Bye.
So, folks, next week on my show, I will have Athen Chimenti of MasteringTheZodiac.com. He actually contacted me with a request that I come on his show, and I said, sure, why not? Hey, people are welcome to contact me to come on their show, and I don't see why I wouldn't let you on unless it's obvious you'd be a horrible fit. But, hey, I like getting the whole slew of different people on, so chances are I won't turn you down. So without further ado, namaste, everybody. This is Andrew Fisher signing off. Enjoy the rest of your trek throughout infinite consciousness. And if you live in the Philadelphia area, try to show up to the Free Your Mind conference this weekend. And I don't know exactly where it's at. I got to check that, but freeyourmindconference.com is the website. So anyway, namaste. Andrew Fisher signing off.